March 8th, 2014, Kuala Lumpur International Airport, Malaysia, just after midnight. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 sat at the gate, preparing for a routine red-eye flight to Beijing, a Boeing 777, one of the most advanced and reliable aircraft ever built. The plane was in excellent condition. 53,000 flight hours logged. No major incidents in its history. Maintenance check completed just 2 weeks earlier. 227 passengers boarded that night. Most were Chinese nationals heading home. Also on board, citizens from Malaysia, Indonesia, Australia, France, Russia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States. Families traveling together. Business people heading to meetings. Tourists returning from vacation. All of them expecting a normal 6-hour flight. The crew consisted of 12 people. Flight attendants who had worked for Malaysia Airlines for years, and in the cockpit, 2 pilots. First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, 27 years old, recently engaged, transitioning to the 777 fleet. This was one of his first flights in the actual aircraft rather than the simulator. And the captain, 53-year-old Zahari Ahmad Shah, an exceptionally experienced pilot who had been with Malaysia Airlines since 1981, a captain on the 777 for over 15 years, a training captain, a man trusted to teach other pilots how to fly this sophisticated machine. At 12:41 a.m. local time, Flight 370 pushed back from the gate. Normal departure, normal taxi to the runway, normal takeoff. The Boeing 777 climbed into the night sky over the South China Sea, heading northeast toward Beijing. In less than 40 minutes, 239 people would vanish without a trace. The flight proceeded normally. At 1:01 a.m., Flight 370 reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. The passengers settled in. Some slept, some watched movies, some read. It was just another red-eye flight. At 1:07 a.m., the aircraft communication addressing and reporting system, known as ACARS, sent its last automatic transmission. This system constantly sends data about the aircraft's performance back to ground systems. Engine status, fuel consumption, position, altitude. The system is designed to transmit this data regularly throughout the flight. At 1:19 a.m., Captain Zahari's voice came over the radio. The plane was approaching the boundary between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace. Air traffic control in Kuala Lumpur was handing them off to controllers in Ho Chi Minh City. Captain Zahari acknowledged the handoff with a standard phrase, "Good night, Malaysian 370. It was the last anyone ever heard from Flight 370. Less than 1 minute later, at 1:21 a.m., the plane's transponder stopped transmitting. The transponder is the device that tells air traffic control exactly where an aircraft is, its altitude, its speed, its identity. When it goes off, the plane doesn't disappear completely from radar, but it becomes much harder to track. It becomes just a blip on military radar screens without any identifying information. The transponder didn't fail. It didn't malfunction. Someone switched it off. Deliberately, manually. Vietnamese air traffic control waited for Flight 370 to check in. Standard procedure when a plane enters your airspace. They waited and waited. No contact. They tried calling the flight. No response. They contacted Malaysian Air Traffic Control. "Have you heard from Malaysian 370? The answer was no. At first it seemed like a communication issue. Radios fail, systems glitch. But as minutes ticked by with no contact, concern grew into alarm. By 2:40 a.m., over an hour after the plane should have checked in, Vietnamese controllers declared an emergency. Something was wrong. What air traffic controllers didn't know yet was that Flight 370 was no longer heading toward Beijing. Military radar in Malaysia had picked up an unidentified aircraft, just a blip without a transponder signal, flying back across the Malay Peninsula, back over Malaysia itself. The plane had turned around. This wasn't a gentle course correction. This was a sharp turn. The aircraft banked left, crossed back over the Malaysian mainland, passed over Penang Island, one of Malaysia's major cities, and headed northwest toward the Strait of Malacca. Whoever was flying the plane knew exactly what they were doing. This was precise, controlled flying. At 2:22 a.m., Malaysian military radar tracked the unknown aircraft near Penang. At 2:40 a.m., the final radar contact showed the plane heading northwest toward the Andaman Sea. Then, nothing. The plane disappeared from even military radar. It had flown beyond radar coverage, out into the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean. 239 people vanished. But the plane wasn't completely invisible. One crucial system was still communicating. The Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, ACARs, had stopped sending data at 1:07 a.m. But there was another system, a system called Inmarsat, a British satellite company that provided communication services to aircraft worldwide. Even though no one on Flight 370 was communicating, the aircraft's satellite communication system was still trying to connect. Every hour it sent an automatic handshake, a ping to Inmarsat's satellite over the Indian Ocean. The plane was saying, "I'm still here, I'm still powered on, I'm still flying." These pings didn't contain location data. They weren't designed to track aircraft. But engineers at Inmarsat realized they could analyze the pings. The frequency of the signal, altered by something called the Doppler effect, could indicate whether the plane was moving toward or away from the satellite. And the time it took for the ping to travel could estimate distance. It was complicated, imprecise, but it was something. The analysis of these satellite pings would eventually reveal something chilling. Flight 370 had flown for 7 more hours after disappearing from radar. 7 hours. Flying somewhere over the Indian Ocean. The last ping was received at 8:19 a.m., over 6 hours after the plane should have landed in Beijing. Then, silence. The plane had run out of fuel. Somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, MH370 had crashed into the sea. But where? The Indian Ocean is vast, over 28 million square miles. Finding a crashed aircraft in that expanse would be like finding a needle in a haystack the size of a continent. The world reacted with shock and confusion. How does a modern Boeing 777 simply vanish? These aircraft are equipped with multiple redundant systems. They're tracked by radar, by satellites, by their own onboard computers. They communicate constantly with ground stations. They're designed to be impossible to lose. And yet, MH370 was gone. Families of the passengers gathered at Beijing Airport waiting for news. Chinese authorities set up a crisis center. The waiting room filled with desperate relatives. Mothers, fathers, children, spouses, all hoping for information, any information. But there was nothing. No distress call, no mayday, no emergency beacon. The plane had simply ceased to exist. Initially, search efforts focused on the South China Sea, along the flight's intended route to Beijing. Ships and aircraft from multiple nations, Malaysia, Vietnam, China, the United States, Australia, scoured the waters. They found nothing, because the plane wasn't there. It had turned back, flown in completely the opposite direction, and for crucial hours, searchers were looking in entirely the wrong place. When Malaysian authorities finally revealed that military radar had tracked the plane flying back over Malaysia, the search shifted. But this revelation came with disturbing questions. Why had Malaysian military not responded when an unidentified aircraft flew across their airspace? Why had they not scrambled fighter jets? Why had this information not been shared immediately? The Malaysian government's handling of the crisis became intensely controversial. As days turned to weeks, theories multiplied. What could have happened to MH370? The possibilities ranged from mechanical failure to terrorism to pilot suicide. Each theory had proponents. Each had evidence supporting it. But none could be proven without finding the aircraft. Theory 1. Catastrophic mechanical failure. Perhaps something went catastrophically wrong with the aircraft. A fire, an explosive decompression, some failure so severe and sudden that the pilots couldn't even send a distress call. The plane's sharp turn back toward Malaysia could have been the pilots trying to reach the nearest airport for an emergency landing. But then why did the transponder shut off? Why did ACAR stop transmitting? And how did the plane keep flying for 7 hours if there was a catastrophic failure? Theory 2. Hijacking. Perhaps terrorists seized control of the aircraft. The timing of the disappearance, right at the handoff point between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace, was suspiciously perfect. A small window where no one was actively watching. The transponder shut-off was clearly deliberate. Maybe hijackers planned to crash the plane into a target, or land it somewhere to use as a weapon later. But investigations into all passengers found no connections to terrorist organizations. And where would they land a massive Boeing 777 without being detected? Theory 3. Pilot suicide. This was perhaps the most controversial theory, that Captain Zahari, for reasons unknown, deliberately crashed the plane, that he waited until the perfect moment, turned off communications, flew the plane to the most remote part of the ocean, and dove it into the sea, taking 238 innocent people with him. The evidence? His flight simulator at home had practiced routes into the southern Indian Ocean. His personal life had some difficulties, and the plane's flight path showed deliberate, calculated actions. But this theory devastated Zahari's family and friends, who insisted he would never do such a thing. In March 2014, just days after the disappearance, an international search effort began. In the southern Indian Ocean, Australia led the operation, coordinating with Malaysia, China, and other nations. The search area was determined by analysis of those Inmarsat satellite pings. Complex mathematical calculations identified an arc, the seventh arc, where the plane most likely crashed. Ships equipped with sonar systems began scanning the ocean floor. The water depth in the search area ranged from 3,000 to 6,000 meters, almost 4 miles deep in places. The seafloor was rugged, mountainous, with deep trenches and steep slopes. Scanning technology could only cover narrow swaths at a time. It would take years to search even a fraction of the potential crash zone. By January 2017, searchers had scoured 120,000 square kilometers of ocean floor. 120,000, an area larger than England. They found shipwrecks. They found geological features never before mapped. They found sea life in the deepest trenches, but they did not find MH370. The search was suspended. Too expensive, too vast, too unlikely to succeed without better information about where to look. But then, something appeared on July 29th, 2015, 16 months after the disappearance. A man, walking on a beach on Réunion Island, a French territory in the western Indian Ocean, found a piece of debris. It was roughly 6 feet long, curved, clearly from an aircraft. Experts identified it as a flaperon, part of a wing. Boeing confirmed it came from a 777. Malaysian authorities confirmed it came from MH370. Finally, physical proof that the plane had crashed into the Indian Ocean. But the flaperon raised as many questions as it answered. How had it drifted 3,000 miles from the suspected crash site? What did its condition tell investigators about the crash? And most importantly, where was the rest of the plane? More debris began washing up on shores across the western Indian Ocean. Mozambique, South Africa, Madagascar, Mauritius, Tanzania. Piece by piece, fragments of MH370 appeared on beaches thousands of miles from the suspected crash zone. By 2018, nearly 30 pieces of debris had been found. Some were confirmed to be from MH370. Others were almost certainly from the plane. A few remain unconfirmed. These debris pieces told a story. They showed that the plane had broken apart. The damage patterns suggested a high-speed impact with the ocean, not a controlled ditching. If Captain Zahari had intentionally crashed the plane, he hadn't tried to land it gently. He had driven it into the sea at high speed. Or, if it wasn't intentional, something had caused the aircraft to plunge from cruise altitude directly into the water. Ocean current analysis tried to work backwards from where debris was found to where it originated. Scientists at Australia's Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, CSIRO, studied years of ocean drift data. They analysed winds, currents, water temperatures. Their conclusion? The debris pattern suggested the crash site was farther north than originally thought. Not around 38 degrees south, but closer to 35 degrees south, still in the Indian Ocean, still along that seventh arc, but in an area that hadn't been thoroughly searched. In January 2018, a private company called Ocean Infinity launched a new search. They brought cutting-edge technology, autonomous underwater vehicles that could scan the seafloor faster and more efficiently than previous methods. They offered Malaysia a no-find, no-fee contract. If they found the plane, Malaysia would pay them. If they didn't find it, the search would cost Malaysia nothing. It seemed like the perfect arrangement. Ocean Infinity searched from January to June 2018. They covered 112,000 square kilometers, advanced sonar, state-of-the-art equipment. They found nothing. In June, they gave up. The search was over. Again. In July 2018, Malaysian authorities released their final investigation report. 495 pages. 4 years of investigation. Interviews with families. Analysis of wreckage. Examination of flight data. Review of air traffic control procedures. The report's conclusion was frustrating in its lack of certainty. The aircraft's controls were likely deliberately manipulated to take it off course. But who manipulated them? The report couldn't say. Pilot suicide? Hijacking? Someone else in the cockpit? Unknown. The report cleared all passengers. Background checks found no connections to terrorism, no suspicious behavior, no red flags. 2 passengers had been traveling on stolen passports, which initially raised alarm. But investigation revealed they were Iranian asylum seekers trying to reach Europe, not terrorists, just desperate people fleeing persecution. The crew was also cleared, mostly. First Officer Farik had no suspicious background. He was young, recently engaged, excited about his future. His family was devastated by his loss. There was no motive, no opportunity for him to have caused this disaster. But Captain Zahari, his case was more complicated. The investigation found that he was separated from his wife, though they still lived in the same house. He was politically active, passionate about Malaysian politics. The day before the flight, a Malaysian opposition politician he supported had been convicted in what many saw as a politically motivated trial. Had this upset Zahari? Depressed him? Angered him enough to do something drastic? Investigators couldn't prove it, but suspicion lingered. And then there was his flight simulator. Zahari had a sophisticated home flight simulator, not unusual for passionate pilots. But investigators found he had run a simulation, practicing a route that flew down the Strait of Malacca, then south into the Indian Ocean, until the plane ran out of fuel and crashed. The route was eerily similar to MH370's final path. Was this evidence of premeditation, or just a pilot exploring various scenarios? Again, impossible to know for certain. Aviation experts worldwide have analyzed this case endlessly. Some are convinced it was pilot suicide. The evidence, they argue, points clearly to deliberate action by someone with extensive knowledge of Boeing 777 systems, the timing of the transponder shutoff, the precise navigation, the route that avoided radar coverage, the final flight path to the most remote part of the ocean. All of this, they say, indicates careful planning. Canadian air crash investigator Larry Vance examined the recovered flaperon and other wing pieces. His conclusion: the plane was ditched in a controlled manner. The damage pattern showed the wings were deployed, suggesting the pilot was trying to land on water. This contradicts the high-speed impact theory. Vance believes Zahari flew the plane to the end, consciously controlling it into the ocean, possibly to ensure it sank intact and would never be found. A perfect crime, a perfect disappearance. But others disagree strongly. They point out that a controlled ditching would have left the plane largely intact on the ocean floor. It would be easier to find. The debris that washed up shows violent breakup, and psychological profiles of Zahari show a dedicated professional, a loving father and grandfather, a man with no history of depression or mental illness. Would such a person suddenly decide to murder hundreds of innocent people? It seems unlikely. Another theory emerged involving hypoxia, oxygen deprivation. Perhaps a fire or decompression event caused everyone on board to lose consciousness. The plane's systems, running on autopilot, could have continued flying for hours until fuel ran out. The sharp turn back over Malaysia could have been the pilots trying to reach an emergency landing site before losing consciousness. But this doesn't explain the deliberate transponder shutoff. Unconscious pilots can't turn off equipment. For the families of the 239 people on board, theories and speculation offered no comfort. They wanted answers. They wanted their loved ones found. They wanted to know why. Chinese families, who made up the majority of passengers, were particularly vocal. They protested outside the Malaysian embassy in Beijing. They accused Malaysia of withholding information. They demanded the search continue. Among the most persistent voices was Blaine Gibson, an American lawyer who made it his mission to find debris from MH370. Gibson walked hundreds of miles of coastline in Madagascar, Mozambique, and other countries. He found multiple pieces of debris that were later confirmed to be from the aircraft. He coordinated with local communities, trained them to recognize aircraft parts, established networks of beach walkers. His dedication was remarkable, but even his efforts couldn't answer the fundamental question: where is the main wreckage? The mystery of MH370 became one of aviation's greatest unsolved cases, comparable only to Amelia Earhart's disappearance in 1937. But Earhart was flying a small plane over the vast Pacific with primitive navigation equipment. MH370 was a modern jet, equipped with every technological advantage, flying in supposedly monitored airspace. How could this happen in the 21st century? How could we lose a Boeing 777? Years passed. The 10th anniversary came and went in March 2024. Families gathered to remember their loved ones. Memorials were held. Promises were made to never give up. But still, the plane remained missing. Still, no one knew exactly what happened. Still, 239 people were lost somewhere in the vastness of the Indian Ocean. Then, in December 2024, news emerged that reignited hope. Ocean Infinity, the company that had searched unsuccessfully in 2018, announced they were ready to try again. They had improved their technology, developed new autonomous underwater vehicles, refined their search algorithms, and they were willing to do it under the same no-find, no-fee arrangement. If they found substantial wreckage, Malaysia would pay them $70 million. If they found nothing, the search would cost Malaysia nothing. The Malaysian government agreed. Transport Minister Anthony Loke announced that a new search would begin. The search area would be 15,000 square kilometers in the southern Indian Ocean. This zone was identified as having the highest probability of containing the wreckage. It was based on new drift analysis, new interpretations of the satellite data, and years of additional research. On December 30th, 2025, Ocean Infinity's vessel Armada 8605 arrived at the search area. The ship was equipped with multiple autonomous underwater vehicles, robotic submarines that could scan vast areas of seafloor simultaneously. These weren't tethered to the ship. They operated independently, programmed to search specific zones, avoiding obstacles, mapping the ocean floor in incredible detail. The search zone was located approximately 2,500 kilometers west of Perth, Australia. The water depth ranged from 4,000 to 6,000 meters. The seafloor was treacherous. Steep slopes, deep canyons, rugged terrain that had defeated previous search efforts. But Ocean Infinity believed their technology was up to the challenge. They had successfully located other deep-sea wrecks, the Argentine submarine San Juan, the bulk carrier Stellar Daisy. If MH370 was in their search area, they believed they could find it. As of January 2026, the search is ongoing. Ocean Infinity has completed multiple phases, scanning thousands of square kilometers of ocean floor. They've encountered challenging conditions. Seasonal weather in the southern Indian Ocean is notoriously hostile. Massive swells, powerful winds, storms that force ships to retreat to port. But between weather windows, the autonomous vehicles continue their methodical search, line by line, grid by grid, scanning, recording, analyzing every feature of the seafloor. What would finding MH370 mean? First and most importantly, it would bring closure to families. They could finally grieve properly. They could have remains to bury. They could know, definitively, that their loved ones are gone. The uncertainty, the not knowing, is its own special torture. Finding the wreckage would end that. Second, it would allow investigators to recover the flight data recorders, the black boxes. These devices record every action in the cockpit, every system status, every conversation between pilots. They're designed to survive crashes, to withstand pressure at extreme ocean depths. If the black boxes can be recovered and their data extracted, we would finally know exactly what happened on Flight 370. We would hear the final words spoken in that cockpit. We would know whether it was pilot action, mechanical failure, or something else entirely. Third, it would have implications for aviation safety. If the crash was caused by a flaw in the Boeing 777's design or systems, that information could prevent future disasters. If it was caused by pilot action, it could lead to changes in crew psychological screening, cockpit security protocols, or aircraft tracking systems. The lessons learned from MH370 could save lives in the future. But what if the plane is never found? What if Ocean Infinity's search, like all the searches before it, comes up empty? Then MH370 will remain aviation's greatest mystery, a modern ghost ship, a Boeing 777 that simply vanished into the vastness of the ocean, taking 239 souls with it, and leaving behind only questions. The disappearance of MH370 has already changed aviation. Airlines now track aircraft more closely. Satellite communications are improving. Real-time streaming of flight data is being implemented. The goal is to ensure that no aircraft can ever again simply disappear the way MH370 did. But these changes came too late for Flight 370. 11 years have passed since that March night when MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur. 11 years of searching, 11 years of theories, 11 years of heartbreak for the families left behind. Some of those families have moved on, finding ways to live with the uncertainty. Others continue to fight, demanding answers, refusing to let the world forget their loved ones. They deserve to know the truth. They deserve closure. They deserve justice if this was a deliberate act. The southern Indian Ocean keeps its secrets well. In those dark, cold depths, somewhere along that seventh arc, lies a Boeing 777. Inside that aircraft are the remains of 239 people. Passengers who expected to land in Beijing for business meetings, family reunions, vacations. Crew members who had flown that route dozens of times before. All gone in a mystery that has consumed millions of dollars in search efforts, generated countless theories, and captured the world's attention for over a decade. Will we ever know what happened to Malaysia Airlines Flight 370? Will Ocean Infinity's new search finally succeed where all others have failed? Will the black boxes be recovered? Will the world finally learn whether this was pilot suicide, mechanical failure, hijacking, or something else entirely? As of now, we wait. The autonomous vehicles continue scanning the ocean floor. Families continue hoping, and somewhere in the vastness of the Indian Ocean, 239 people await discovery. This is the story of MH370, the plane that vanished, the mystery that refuses to be solved, the tragedy that haunts aviation to this day. Until the wreckage is found, until the black boxes tell their story, the questions will remain. What happened to Flight 370? Where are the passengers and crew? And will we ever know the truth? The ocean is vast, but the search continues. Thank you for listening to this episode of Sleepy Mysteries. The disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of our time. And as you've heard, The search continues even today in January 2026. If this story captivated you, please subscribe to Sleepy Mysteries so you never miss our deep dives into the world's most intriguing unsolved cases. We bring you comprehensive investigations into mysteries that have baffled investigators, haunted families, and captured global attention. Hit that like button if you found this investigation compelling, and leave a comment below. What do you think happened to MH370? Was it pilot suicide? A catastrophic failure? Something else entirely? Do you think Ocean Infinity will finally find the wreckage? We'd love to hear your thoughts and theories. And if you enjoyed this mystery, check out our other videos. We've covered everything from the Devil's Footprints that terrified England in 1855, to the haunting of Jennifer Patterson, to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Each story is thoroughly researched, respectfully told, and designed to keep you engaged from beginning to end. Remember, these aren't just mysteries. They're real events that affected real people. 239 passengers and crew members boarded Flight 370, expecting a normal flight to Beijing. Their families still wait for answers. Until that wreckage is found, the mystery continues. Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of aviation's darkest enigmas. Until next time, stay curious, stay questioning, and keep wondering about the mysteries that refuse to be solved. This has been Sleepy Mysteries, read to you by myself, Regina Sage Monroe.
For those of you in our our business and first class cabins, if you would make sure that you push the green airplane reset mode button